Why are you getting so worked up about marrying someone who dropped out of college? My sister Michelle, who loves to call herself an elite, said in a triumphant voice. Since I introduced my fiancé, she's been saying whatever she pleases. But I've had enough. She'll regret knowing the truth. I'm Roseanne. I'm 29 years old and about to marry my fiancé. My life is about to change significantly after marriage. I quit my job at a trading company and am now focusing on wedding preparations. My fiancé Hadley is a very calm person. He gets along well with my parents too. It helps that Hadley and I met through my dad's work. My dad is the president of a small but beloved local company. Our business thrives because of the support of local people. I really respect my dad for that. When I see Dad's happy face saying, "I can't believe Hadley is marrying my daughter," my joy about the wedding doubles. It's supposed to be the springtime of my life, but... Hello. Sis, are you here? My parents are at work during the day on weekdays. I was home alone, and the loud footsteps echoed in the empty house. Roseanne, I'm home. Oh, there you are. Long time no see. The quiet afternoon was suddenly interrupted by my sister Michelle's arrival. Michelle, who is 2 years younger than me, lives alone away from home. This house looks old. Dad is the president, so he should spend some money on renovations. Michelle threw her bags on the sofa and looked around the living room with disdain. Dad and Mom are practical people. Besides, this house isn't even 20 years old. Oh, yes, sis, you're frugal too. Michelle scowled, as usual. Michelle has always loved flashy things and glamorous events. When she was little, she would often demand to go on overseas trips or buy brand-name clothes, causing trouble for our parents. Our family wasn't struggling with money, but we were practical. That's why our parents initially opposed Michelle attending an expensive private school with a cute uniform just because she liked it. But as soon as they said no, Michelle threw a huge tantrum, crying and causing a ruckus. In the end, our parents couldn't risk her wrecking the house, so they let her attend the private school. You should have listened to my wishes from the beginning. When I heard her change her attitude as soon as our parents gave their consent, I was genuinely shocked. Who on earth did she inherit that from? Seeing Michelle still flaunting her flashy style, I couldn't help but think that. What are you talking about? Oh, nothing, just talking to myself. Oh my gosh, you sound like an old lady. Michelle exaggeratedly pinched her nose and made herself comfortable. Michelle, did you come for something specific today? Oh, right. Sis, you're getting married, right? What's your fiancé like? Michelle leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with mischief. What do you mean by what's he like? He's just a normal person. What university did he graduate from? Michelle shot the question without missing a beat. There it is. And I almost burst out laughing. After attending an elite private school, Michelle went on to a prestigious university. She is incredibly proud of her academic background. Whenever she meets someone, "Which university did you graduate from?" she has to ask. It's almost like her hobby to ask and then feel superior. So, which university did your fiancé graduate from, sis? Frustrated by my lack of response, Michelle pressed the question further. My fiancé didn't go to college. At my answer, Michelle gasped dramatically. Are you saying he only finished high school? No, that's not it. What do you mean? Don't tell me. My fiancé Hadley's highest education level is high school. But he is. No way! I can't believe it! Without listening to my full explanation, Michelle screamed. Why would you lie about something like this? So, he is a high school dropout, but I have never seen a dropout before. Unbelievable. Actually, I'd love to meet one. Ignoring my explanation, Michelle continued her ranting, making me slightly irritated, but I quickly gave up on the conversation as usual. Okay. My fiancé's education has nothing to do with you, Michelle. Yes, it does. My boyfriend and I are elites, intellectual leaders. Boasting, Michelle mentioned her proud boyfriend she met in college and used unnecessarily complicated words to show off. Intellectual leaders? Do you even know what that means? That's what people like me and my boyfriend are called. So, what kind of people are they? Trying to silence the ever-noisy Michelle, I asked deeply, and as expected, she was at a loss for words. Details don't matter. We're just very great and very smart people. Michelle's ridiculously vague explanation made me chuckle. Geez. Sis, you're always so nitpicky. What I'm trying to say is that we come from prestigious private schools, and having a dropout in the family is absolutely unacceptable. Michelle, crossing her arms, got angry. As I was about to counter her rudeness, Michelle suddenly had a realization and abruptly changed her attitude. Well, whatever. I'm glad I got to see your face, sis. Bye. With that, she left as suddenly as she had come. What was that all about? She's always like a hurricane. I felt relieved for the moment and started preparing for the wedding I was looking forward to. Not thinking deeply about why Michelle, who never stops once she starts, had left so easily. Then, the weekend arrived. It was the day for the much-anticipated wedding meeting. I was supposed to meet my fiancé Hadley directly at the church, the venue for our wedding. The church where we would have our wedding was designated as a National Historic Landmark, with a venerable history. Stepping inside, I felt the weight of history and the serene atmosphere making me straighten my back. I can't believe I get to have my wedding here. I'm so lucky. As I murmured, I heard footsteps behind me. Hey, Roseanne! It was my fiancé, Hadley, calling out to me with a smile. Hadley, thanks for taking time out of your busy weekend. It's for our important wedding, Roseanne. Everyone was happy to give me the time off. Hadley and I walked together towards the office where the planner was waiting. Like any couple having a wedding, Hadley and I were no exception in wanting to infuse our personal touches into the ceremony. We planned to have the ceremony at the historic church and the reception in its garden. Since the venue was so prestigious, we chose elegant dresses, tuxedos, and bouquets to match. We also meticulously selected the food, wedding favors, wedding cake, and table flowers to ensure our guests would enjoy themselves. Oh, but all the dresses are so beautiful. Maybe I'll wear them all. That sounds great. You'd be like a peacock, very eye-catching. Hadley, that was a joke. You were supposed to laugh. Hadley, who is a bit absent-minded but incredibly gentle, never complains no matter how much I waver. I chose the venue, so I want the ceremony to be as close to your wishes as possible. When he says things like that, I feel like I want to spend the rest of my life with Hadley. Everything was going smoothly in our meeting until a sudden dark cloud loomed over us. Oh! There you are! Hey, is that Michelle's sister and her dropout fiancé? I turned around at the sound of noisy footsteps and chatter, and there stood Michelle with an unfamiliar man. Michelle! What are you doing here? I thought I'd come and oversee your wedding planning. How did you know where and when the meeting was? I asked in shock, and Michelle just laughed nonchalantly. When I visited home last time, your planner was left open, and I saw the details. Damn it. I regretted it from the bottom of my heart. I had left the wedding materials and planner spread out on the living room table, forgetting Michelle's sharp eyes. "So, who is this?" Although I had a pretty good guess, I asked about the man standing next to Michelle with his hair in a side part. "This is my boyfriend, no, fiancé, Jed." "Nice to meet you, sis." The man, in an expensive suit with a smug smile, called me sis, and I was stunned. "When did you get engaged?" "On the way back from visiting home. When I saw the wedding brochures, I wanted to get married too." "You decided on something like that so casually." "If you want to do something, move immediately." Michelle's astonishing decisiveness left me in shock as her fiancé, Jed, gave a cocky smile. "Well, for elites like us. I mean, intellectual leaders, marriage is a simple matter." Hearing that, I understood why Michelle's boyfriend was a perfect match for her. They both love to throw around words like elite and educational background. And now I understood why Michelle had started using the term intellectual leaders. It must have been picked up from her fiancé to sound more impressive. "Anyway, I'm also getting married at this church." "What?" I was taken aback by Michelle's sudden declaration as I was analyzing her and her fiancé. "It's fine for sisters to have the same venue, but you'll set your date apart, right? Like a year later?" "No way. I don't want to go after you, sis. I'll have mine before your ceremony." "What are you talking about?" Seeing my shock, Michelle laughed. "I mean, sis, you're marrying a dropout, right? I don't want to follow you after you've settled for someone like that." As I trembled with anger, Hadley gently touched my shoulder to calm me down. "Let's both calm down a bit. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to neglect your dropout fiancé." Even though he's my sister's fiancé, Michelle didn't seem to care about making a proper introduction. But Hadley, always courteous, started to speak to Michelle. "Nice to meet you. I'm Hadley, Roseanne's fiancé. Michelle, you said you'd have your ceremony before ours. Was there an open reservation?" Michelle looked down at the ever-polite Hadley with a mocking smile. "In this world, there's something called a waiting list. The spot exactly 1 week before your scheduled date was available. When you book a venue, it's common sense to check if any good dates have cancellations, right?" Michelle's fiancé joined in with a creepy laugh. However, Hadley tilted his head in confusion in front of the two of them. "Oh, there were cancellations? In that case, we might be able to book it." Hadley muttered to himself, and Michelle and her fiancé Jed laughed mockingly. "Just as we thought, Sis's fiancé is exactly as we imagined. He's kinda spacey, typical for someone who dropped out." "Hey, since you dropped out, do you even know calculus? Can you say sine, cosine, tangent?" Michelle and Jed laughed crudely, and I glared at them with all my might. "Enough. If you keep causing a ruckus, get out." Michelle looked at me, blazing with anger, and exaggeratedly shrugged her shoulders. "Scary. Sis, you're really worried about marrying a dropout, aren't you?" "You shouldn't marry out of desperation, sis." Feeling completely drained, I had no words left for these two who couldn't understand a thing. "All right, let's accomplish what we came here for today." Completely carefree, Michelle started taking pictures of our wedding planning documents on the desk. "What are you doing?" "These are important documents for our wedding." Hadley tried to stop her, but Michelle pushed him aside and continued taking pictures. "I don't have time until the wedding. You get that, right?" Michelle's strange statement made me step closer to her. "What do you mean? Why does not having time mean you need to take pictures of our wedding plans?" "It's too hard to come up with everything now, so I'll just copy you guys." I was left speechless again, for what felt like the 100th time today. Could I really be rendered speechless so frequently in my life? This bouquet design is nice. And we'll order the table flowers from the same place. The wedding cake is stylish too. It's more fitting for a university graduate like me than for a dropout groom. Satisfied, Michelle and Jed left just as noisily as they had arrived. No way. They're having the same setup a week before us. This can't be real. Getting married at the church a week before us is true, but they'll probably just use our ideas as inspiration, right? Hadley and I thought even those two would know the difference between right and wrong. I was used to being pushed around by Michelle's selfishness. I felt sorry for Hadley, but I decided to give up on Michelle and her fiancé having their wedding a week before ours. Just as I began to think about apologizing to our relatives for the burden of having two sisters' weddings so close together, I received a call from the florist I had found on social media, who specialized in weddings. An order came in for the exact same design a week before your wedding? I had requested a particularly unique bouquet and table flowers from that florist. The same design had been ordered for the week before my wedding, so she called to confirm if it was a prank. The person who placed the order, is their name Michelle? I asked hesitantly, and she confirmed it was. No way. A terrible feeling washed over me, so I called the dress shop where I had reserved my rental dress. As expected, every dress I had reserved had been rented out by Michelle for her wedding a week before mine. I also called the store where I reserved the wedding cake, and it turned out they had received an order for the exact same cake a week before I placed mine. She really copied everything. I let my anger take over and called Michelle. Hello? Michelle answered with her usual carefree voice, and I immediately felt my anger rising. Michelle, did you really copy our entire wedding plan? I told you, I didn't have time to come up with something from scratch, so I decided to use yours. Michelle's voice sounded unapologetic, which made me even angrier. It's one thing to get married at the same church, but don't copy everything Hadley and I worked so hard to plan. And your wedding is a week before mine. Showing up in the same dress, bouquet, and with the same cake is going to make us look ridiculous. Michelle dismissed my seriousness with a cheerful tone. There's something I wanted to say to you too. I tried ordering the same stuff, but sis, aren't you spending a bit too much on the wedding? How dare you? And no, we have a budget, and everything is within that. That's fine, but that amount of money shouldn't be spent by someone marrying a college dropout. You'll need money for lots of things in the future. I could practically see Michelle's smug face through the phone. Speechless with anger, I listened as Michelle continued confidently. The wedding isn't the end goal. Sis, you're marrying a dropout and you're going to have a life full of compromises. Why do you have to say such things? Our plan was perfect for elites like us. If you don't want to be compared, maybe you should reconsider your venue and plans to something more modest. No way. The venue is non-negotiable, and Hadley and I put our hearts into this plan. Michelle laughed as if cutting me off. What's the point of putting effort into a wedding with a dropout? Michelle, that's enough. I clutched the phone tightly after Michelle hung up, pacing the living room in fury. Once I calmed down a bit, I called my fiancé Hadley. What's wrong? Hearing Hadley's calm voice almost brought me to tears. Hadley, it's Michelle. I explained to Hadley how Michelle had copied everything about our wedding. I see. We can't let this slide. Exactly. But what can we do? In that case, let's call Michelle and her fiancé to our next planning meeting. What? We then meticulously planned our strategy over the phone. Got it. We'll make Michelle regret doing this. Feeling much more determined, I ended the call with Hadley. On the day of our wedding planning meeting, Why did you call Jed and me here? We're really busy. Michelle and her fiancé Jed were extremely annoyed at being summoned to the church office. We wanted to talk to you about copying our entire wedding plan. I looked at the two calmly. We didn't have time until the wedding, so we adopted your ideas. That's right. That plan isn't suitable for someone marrying a dropout, so you should go for a simpler wedding. Seeing them sitting there so arrogantly, Hadley and I decided to tease them a little. Our wedding is something we designed for ourselves. It's something that fits us, and I think everyone will be happy with it. That's right. We thought about having a wedding that suits us at this historic church. As expected, Michelle and Jed started laughing at our words. That wedding that suits you, does Sis's fiancé even have a proper job? I've been wondering that. What kind of job can a college dropout get? To the laughing pair, Hadley calmly replied. In simple terms, helping out with the family business. Helping out with the family business? You mean like being a homemaker? Michelle exaggeratedly leaned back. She then leaned in close to Jed and laughed mockingly. See, a dropout with no proper work experience. Yeah, Michelle wisely chose an elite like me, but Sis doesn't have the same eye for quality. Marrying someone unemployed, unbelievable. No matter how rude their comments were, Hadley and I didn't mind. In fact, thinking about what was to come, we almost wanted them to keep going. I do contribute to society, you know. When Hadley laughed, Michelle and Jed only got more encouraged. Being a homemaker doesn't count as a job, you know that, right? We, the intellectual elite, keep society running, while you are just a burden. We didn't realize there were such representatives of burdens. Good thing we're in the intellectual elite. We, the intellectual elite, never had to deal with such people, but now, thanks to Sis's marriage, we're related. Having a non-intellectual elite in the family is a problem. Right. The intellectual elite's family interactions should be with the intellectual elite, and only with the intellectual elite. Michelle and Jed were getting so carried away, I started losing track of what they were saying. I just heard intellectual elite so many times. Just as I was clutching my head, we heard heavy footsteps behind us. How disgraceful to use such distasteful words. I'm ashamed of my own daughter. Dad. Michelle turned around, startled by the voice. Why is Dad here? Hadley and I asked him to come. We wanted him to see how you and your fiancé behave. I thought this might calm them down a bit, but Michelle and Jed's attitude remained unchanged. Perfect timing, Dad. Did you know Sis's fiancé is a college dropout? My fiancé Jed is a graduate of an exclusive intellectual elite university. This is the first time you're meeting him, right? Nice to meet you, Dad. I'm Jed, a graduate of an exclusive intellectual elite university. We'll be having our ceremony here at this church a week before Roseanne's, so I look forward to it. Laughing as he introduced himself, Jed made Dad scowl deeply. So, you're the one Michelle chose. Pathetic. You two are a perfect match. It's pathetic to think that, too. Hey, Dad. What's pathetic about it? Sis is the one who's pathetic. That's right. Roseanne is marrying a dropout who helps with household chores. Is there anything more pathetic? Despite Michelle and Jed's persistence, Dad, usually calm, raised his voice with a stern face. Stop calling Hadley a dropout and unemployed. Michelle, a bit taken aback by Dad's anger, still continued to argue with her characteristic defiance. We're not saying anything wrong. A dropout helping with household chores has no future. They're even pushing to have a wedding. So, Michelle, you're planning to sabotage Roseanne's wedding by copying everything? How does Dad know? Apparently, Michelle wanted to keep it a secret and have the ceremony without us knowing. Michelle glared at me with a sharp look, but I'm no longer intimidated by that. I consulted Dad. It's not just about me, it's about the family's reputation. What does it matter about the reputation of someone who dropped out and is unemployed? It was Dad who finally reached his limit with Michelle's insults towards Hadley. Enough already! How dare you insult someone so outstanding by calling them a dropout and unemployed? Do you not understand Hadley's position? So, Sis's fiancé is just helping around the house, right? You don't even know the difference between helping with the family business and helping around the house. Hadley is not just helping with the family business, he is the head of it. Oh really? And what kind of business is that? Gardening or something? It's this church you're in right now. Dad's loud voice seemed to pass right through Michelle and Jed's heads, leaving them both stunned. What? What about this church? Well, Hadley is the pastor of this church. I made sure to clearly state the fact so it would reach Michelle and Jed's stunned minds. A pastor? That's a pretty important position, Michelle exclaimed, and Jed started to get agitated too. How can someone who dropped out become an important person at a church? Seeing them calm down and talk to Hadley, it seemed they finally understood his position. To make things clearer, I began explaining in detail. This is a historic church, right? Hadley was born to inherit it. Hadley, standing beside me, added with an embarrassed smile. When I was in high school, a family tragedy happened, and I had to take over suddenly. That's why I dropped out of high school. Wait a minute, working at a church requires some qualifications, right? I know that much. Michelle was still trying to find faults, with a smug look on her face. Hadley, however, continued to explain calmly. Yes, to obtain the necessary qualifications at a young age, I attended a theological seminary. A theological seminary? What's that? With a lot of confusion evident on Michelle and Jed's faces, Hadley continued talking. To get into the seminary, I needed recommendations and proof of high school level education, so I took the General Educational Development (GED) test when I was 16. Hold on, what? Still seeing confusion on the so-called elites' faces, I couldn't help but feel exasperated. In other words, Hadley had the same qualifications as a high school graduate at the age of 16. Do you get how exceptional that is? Yeah, it's amazing that someone like him is going to be our brother-in-law. Beside Jed, who had changed his attitude, Michelle ground her teeth in frustration. But isn't church work easy? We're still intellectually superior. Michelle, you're still saying that. Dad was furious at Michelle's desperate attempts to assert her superiority. Hadley is an esteemed pastor of a historic church and has been a great help to our company. Yet you continue to disrespect him. Facing Dad's shaking anger. But, Michelle still muttered. Turning away from Michelle, Dad apologized to Hadley. Hadley, please forgive my daughter's rudeness. I promise Michelle will not come near this church again. Wait a minute. We're having our wedding here. I'm definitely going to make sure it gets canceled, Dad said firmly to Michelle, who looked like she was about to start a commotion. Seeing this, that's right. Hadley nodded. Michelle and her fiancé, Jed, probably don't want to be associated with a dropout like me. Maybe it's better this way. They wouldn't want to have their wedding at a church where a dropout is the minister, right? Seeing Hadley say this with a smile, Michelle finally seemed to realize the reality. No way, I want to have a better wedding here than Sis. I've already bragged to my friends. No, no, no! Michelle stomped her feet in frustration. Her behavior could only be described as pathetic. Give it up. Besides, it's our fault too, for always giving in whenever Michelle threw a fit. Dad. We're already in tears here, just let us have the wedding. Having people with prestigious backgrounds as relatives would be a plus for the minister of this church, wouldn't it? Jed, rubbing his hands together, approached Dad. What's a plus about it? It's nothing but a minus. Besides, you have no right to call me Dad. It's ridiculous. You two didn't even properly announce your engagement, and now you're here laughing like fools, expecting to have a wedding here? Seeing that crying wasn't going to work with the enraged Dad, Michelle stopped her tears and began making excuses. But we suddenly decided to get married, and we were busy, and we don't really know how to do formal greetings. Even as Michelle pouted and made excuses, Dad glared at her. Enough. We don't need uneducated relatives who only want to use the term intellectual elite to sound important. Michelle, our family is cutting ties with you. At Dad's sudden declaration of disownment, Michelle turned pale. No way, Dad, you're joking. I wouldn't say something like this as a joke. Spend some time alone and think about how terrible you've been treating people. With Dad's declaration of disownment, Michelle and Jed turned pale and started to panic. No, I can't stand it. Dad, I love being the daughter of a CEO in the intellectual elite. I don't care. Your like-minded husband is from that intellectual elite, right? Now you can brag about being the wife of an intellectual elite. Jed turned even paler at Dad's words as he turned away. This is bad, Michelle. I quit my job because I thought your dad was a CEO. If we're disowned, I'll be unemployed. Are you kidding? I just submitted my resignation because I thought I'd be a housewife after marrying you. The resignation process is already complete. As Michelle and Jed started to insult each other, we just watched them. You two, what a reckless move. I said, exasperated, and Hadley nodded gently. Like a catapult. Hadley, that's a hard-to-understand metaphor. In the end, Michelle and Jed, who kept making a fuss, were taken away by the furious Dad. And as planned, Hadley and I were able to have our dream wedding at the church where Hadley serves as a minister. Relatives and friends all praised the beautiful ceremony and enjoyed it. I am filled with joy and happiness. Of course, Michelle did not attend. Free from the long-standing trouble, I feel honestly relieved. Michelle and Jed, despite their impressive educational backgrounds, are struggling to find new jobs because of their Everest-sized pride. There was one time when I answered one of the many calls from Michelle. Hello? Finally, sis, you answered. Could you lend me some money? We're struggling to cover living expenses, but I promise I'll pay you back soon. Michelle, speaking rapidly, seemed to be having a hard time giving up her love for a flashy lifestyle even after becoming unemployed. Oh, so now you're crying to me, the one who chose a college dropout? Where's your pride? I replied coldly, making Michelle stumble over her words. But I didn't know Hadley was a dropout. I'm sorry. As a pastor's wife, you must be well off, right? Could you just help a little? Determined that this would be the last time, I cleared my throat and took a deep breath. Stop whining! If you want to call yourselves intellectual leaders, bite the bullet, get a job, and contribute to society. I could hear Michelle gasp on the other end of the line. Satisfied with my response, I hung up the phone. Since then, I haven't heard from Michelle at all. Hadley and I have been busy working to support our church. Hadley, though sometimes a bit absent-minded, is a really handsome pastor. To support him better, I've started attending a college to get my own pastor's qualifications. It's a hectic but fulfilling time, and working toward our goals makes me very happy. I had just finished dinner alone and was getting ready for bed while watching my favorite drama on TV when suddenly, I heard a loud banging on the front door. To check what was going on, I quickly put on a light jacket, changed from slippers to sandals, and walked to the door, asking, "Who is it?" without opening it. Then, from the pitch-black, stormy night outside, I barely heard a voice saying, "Grandma." It was the voice of my grandchild, Emily. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw Emily standing there, tears streaming down her face. I quickly pulled her into the house to shield her from the strong night wind and calmed her down before asking what had happened. It was clear that something urgent had brought her to my house alone at such a late hour. Even though I was worried about her little body being out in the strong wind, I wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and listened to her story. "Emily, what happened? Why are you here alone at this hour? Where's your mom?" Mom isn't moving. She collapsed." Upon hearing that, I couldn't sit still and drove Emily to her mother's house to check on her. As Emily led me to the living room, I immediately saw Grace lying on the floor. "Grace? Grace! Emily, where's your dad?" In this situation, there's no way her husband, Bobby, wouldn't be around. "Dad hit Mom, then left the house, saying she'd wake up soon. Then he went to work." Hearing that, a shock like lightning ran through my body. "Mrs. White. Mrs. White. Mrs. Frances White. Oh, yes. Sorry, I'm coming." In the waiting room of our regular hospital, whether on weekdays or weekends, it's always crowded, which naturally means long waiting times. Usually, I kill time with the numerous magazines and TV provided by the hospital, but once those become boring, there's nothing left to do but wait. In such times, the only way to pass the time is to use my phone. I used to read the news, but lately, I've been obsessed with something Grace introduced to me: social media. As a result, I sometimes miss the nurse calling my name. "Mrs. White, thank you for coming to your regular checkup. Your health seems fine. By the way, I heard from the nurse that you've been quite into social media lately." "Yes, that's right. Grace taught me about it." The reason I started using social media. It wasn't just because Grace told me it was fun, it was also because the man Grace married happens to be a somewhat famous influencer. Before getting married, Grace had no interest in social media, and she would often wonder aloud during our lunchtime variety shows why it was so popular. However, when the topic of marriage or relationships came up on the show, her demeanor would change. She used to laugh along, but suddenly, she'd sigh and look at the magazines on the table. Grace had a history of dating several men, but none of those relationships led to marriage. Each one ended within 3 years, and she often lamented her bad luck with men. But recently, those complaints have stopped, and she avoids marriage-related topics on TV or in magazines, almost as if she's unconsciously blocking them out. Has she given up on marriage, or has she grown tired of the idea? Seeing Grace react so strongly against marriage makes it difficult for me to ask if she's met anyone new recently. Despite this, I still want Grace to marry and build a happy family. I wish for this because my own marriage with my late husband was so happy, and I want Grace to find the same kind of happiness. However, as a parent, I don't want to force it upon her. I wish there was a good way to help. Thinking about all this, it was time for my regular hospital visit. I took an eco bag with me to stop by the grocery store on the way back. As I checked in and waited in the reception area for my turn, I overheard a small conversation between the receptionists. Usually, I wouldn't pay attention, but today, for some reason, I found myself intrigued by their conversation. They were talking about something that had been on TV lately, dating apps. I was so desperate for a boyfriend that I finally tried a dating app. What? You hadn't tried one yet? I've been using one for a while now. I knew about dating apps from TV, but I didn't understand how they worked or how people met through them. Curious, I looked up dating apps on my phone. This is it. I couldn't sit still, even though my turn might be called any moment, so I asked the receptionist to explain dating apps to me. I left the hospital and, forgetting all about dinner shopping, went straight home. Grace, who had taken the day off to clean the house, looked puzzled as she saw me return empty-handed, despite saying I'd stop by the grocery store after my appointment. Mom, you said you were going to the grocery store. Why did you come back with nothing? Did you forget your wallet? Grace, why don't you try a dating app? What? Grace never expected her mom to suggest a dating app. However, as I saw Grace's face, she didn't seem like she had completely given up on marriage. She looked almost cheerful. Although she initially said no, as I kept talking about the app and sharing stories from the receptionists about how they met their boyfriends, I could see Grace's expression change, showing clear interest. After dinner, I went to the bathroom. When I came back to the living room, I caught a glimpse of Grace's phone screen. It seemed she had downloaded the dating app while I was in the bathroom and was setting it up. Noticing my presence, Grace quickly hid her phone and gave me a suspicious look as I grinned. What's with that look? I didn't start it because you suggested it. I had been curious about it for a while. Sure, I get it. So, have you found anyone interesting yet? Well, it's not that easy. I just started. Even though she seemed skeptical, Grace's face looked happy as she used the app, which made me feel cheerful too. A week later. Friday evening. As I was preparing dinner, Grace came home from work, threw her bags at the door, and rushed over to show me her phone. Mom, what should I do? I've been asked out on a date. She had matched with a man on the dating app one suggested, and he had asked her out for a date this Sunday. Surprised and happy, I decided to make Grace's favorite meal to celebrate and boost her spirits for the upcoming date. The big day arrived. Grace pulled out stylish clothes and accessories she hadn't worn since she stopped dating, put on perfect makeup for the first time in ages, and, with trembling hands from nervousness, headed out for her date. As I watched her leave, I could only hope for a good outcome. That night, my heart wouldn't stop pounding, and I ended up drinking alone for the first time in years to calm my nerves and fall asleep. When I woke up, sunlight was peeking through the curtains. I went to check Grace's room, but she wasn't back yet. It was just before 6 a.m. I remembered Grace telling me she had taken the morning off, and thinking she might be in the arms of her date now brought back the same excitement I felt while watching a drama. I had an early breakfast while watching the morning entertainment show, did some chores, and waited for Grace to come home. After a while, Grace came back home, and from the sparkle in her eyes, I could tell her date was a success. She noticed me, flashed a V sign without saying a word, and then headed to the bathroom for a shower before her afternoon work started. That's great, Grace. After that, Grace had a serious relationship with the man she dated and got married a year later. The man she brought home to introduce to me before their marriage was someone who had recently become famous for his social media streaming, and although I wasn't very familiar with the internet, he was apparently quite a well-known figure. At first, I was a bit worried about whether his job could really support a family, but as soon as I heard about his income from Grace, all my concerns vanished. Bobby's job brings in that much income? I'm surprised. Grace hadn't expected to connect with a famous influencer through a dating app either, and she mentioned how surprised she was when she heard about his job from him. They had a grand wedding, which Bobby posted about on his social media, drawing a lot of attention and even making it to online news. To avoid causing trouble for Grace by exposing her identity to the public, Bobby decided not to disclose much about her and chose to live in a condominium close to my house. Thanks to that, Grace wasn't bothered by Bobby's fans and could live a peaceful life. A year after their marriage, they were blessed with a child, whom they named Emily. After the baby was born, Bobby actively participated in childcare, and when he posted about it on social media, he became even more popular, leading to more promotional offers from companies. Grace, at Bobby's suggestion, quit her job to become a housewife and took care of the household and childcare. Whenever she had questions about these unfamiliar tasks, she would come to me for advice, and I felt happy to see her growth up close. However, as Bobby's work got busier and their home became more affluent, Grace began to feel that Bobby's attitude towards the family was becoming distant. Grace would visit me to talk about her worries, but at that time, I would tell her that it was only natural for someone to become busy with work, just as my late husband had. When work settles down, Bobby will return to his old self. Let's focus on the household for now, and I'll help you. Yeah, you're right. He will return to normal. At that time, I couldn't see the depth of Grace's feelings. That's why I carelessly uttered those words without any real basis. 6 months had passed since Grace first came to me with her concerns. We used to have regular video calls with Grace, Emily, and me whenever we had the time, enjoying conversations and hearing about Emily's growth, but that had gradually stopped due to their busy schedules. One day, something urgent came up, and despite being asked to call before visiting, I went to Grace's house without prior notice. I'm sorry for coming suddenly. I had an urgent matter. No, it's fine. When I visited their home, I noticed something odd about Grace and Emily's behavior. Sensing that something was off, I didn't ask any questions and was about to enter the house when Bobby came out of the living room with a guilty look on his face. Francis, I've always told you to call before coming over. I sometimes work from home. I'm sorry, I forgot to call because it was urgent. I'll make sure to remember next time. Bobby frowned and went back to the living room to resume his work, and we finished our business in another room to avoid disturbing him. Then, we spent some time together as a family for the first time in a while. In the time I hadn't seen her, Emily had grown even more adorable, and her sweet smile was almost too bright for my old eyes. Grace, too, looked more like a mother than ever before. After about an hour of talking, Bobby knocked on the door and said, "I'm going out," and left. I've finished my business, so I should head home. There are other things I need to do. Okay, Mom? Just as I was about to leave, Grace hesitated as if she wanted to say something. Yes? What is it? No, I'll talk to you if I have any more problems. I left, still feeling the unease from earlier, but I didn't ask them anything more and went on to my next task. On the bus, I saw Bobby's social media post. It was a picture of a happy family, completely different from the tense atmosphere I had felt earlier. Seeing the post, I naively thought they must have had a minor argument before I arrived and made up afterwards. This assumption was proven wrong a week later on a night when strong winds rattled the windows, and a loud noise echoed through the house. I had just finished dinner alone and was getting ready for bed while watching my favorite drama on TV when suddenly, I heard a loud banging on the front door. With the wind blowing hard outside, at first, I thought it was some trash being blown against the door. But the knocking continued, clearly not just debris hitting the door. To check what was going on, I quickly put on a light jacket, changed from slippers to sandals, and walked to the door, asking, "Who is it?" without opening it. Then, from the pitch-black, stormy night outside, I barely heard a voice saying, "Grandma." I had heard this voice before. In fact, I was certain there was no way I could be mistaken. It was Emily's voice. As soon as I opened the front door, I saw Emily standing there, tears streaming down her face. I quickly pulled her into the house to shield her from the strong night wind and calmed her down before asking what had happened. It was clear that something urgent had brought her to my house alone at such a late hour. Even though I was worried about her little body being out in the strong wind, I wrapped her in a blanket to warm her up and listened to her story.
"Emily, what happened? Why are you here alone at this hour? Where's your mom?"
Mom isn't moving. She collapsed." Emily's trembling voice managed to get those words out. Upon hearing that, I couldn't sit still and drove Emily to Grace's condominium to check on her. When we arrived, Emily used her key to open the entrance lock, and we rushed to their apartment, banging on the door. I thought that maybe Grace had woken up during the time Emily had come to my house. But after knocking several times, there was no response from inside. Emily used her key, and although I felt bad about entering without permission, I couldn't afford to think about that now, worried about Grace's safety. Following Emily's lead, I hurried to the living room, where we immediately saw Grace lying on the floor.
"Grace? Grace! Emily, where's your dad?"
In this situation, there was no way her husband, Bobby, wouldn't be around. Dad hit Mom, then left the house, saying she'd wake up soon. Then he went to work. Hearing that, a shock like lightning ran through my body. Although many thoughts crossed my mind, I was primarily worried about Grace's condition, so I quickly called an ambulance. At the hospital, the doctors found that Grace had suffered a severe head injury likely caused by the fall, resulting in internal bleeding that required emergency surgery. Grace was taken to the operating room, and the surgery was expected to take several hours. The red light outside the operating room cast a dim glow in the dark hospital, making my and Emily's hearts churn like a stormy sea. Several hours later, Grace was brought out on a gurney, accompanied by doctors and nurses. Emily and I stood there, stunned. The surgeon informed us that while the surgery was successful, Grace was still in a critical condition, hovering between life and death. As we watched Grace being moved to her hospital room, a mix of emotions overwhelmed us, but I decided to try contacting Bobby. However, despite repeated attempts, I couldn't reach him, so I stayed by Grace's side for several days, while Emily continued to go to school from the hospital. The nurses noticed the odd situation of a patient whose chart indicated 2 parents, but only one was present, but they didn't pry into our private matters. Still, I couldn't get in touch with Bobby. Eventually, I managed to get in direct contact with Bobby a few days after Grace was hospitalized. Amidst my numerous voicemails, he must have heard one and showed up at the hospital, feigning concern in front of the nurses. However, despite being at the hospital, he showed no real concern for Grace's condition, only speaking to her briefly, acting so indifferent that it was hard to believe he was her husband.
"Bobby, are you really here because you're worried about Grace, or is there something inconvenient that you're worried about if she wakes up?"
Without flinching, he coldly responded, "She hurt herself," leaving me in disbelief. Why? Because Emily's testimony clearly indicated that Bobby was responsible. There was no way pure-hearted Emily would lie. Even if she had lied, she had nothing to gain from it, and considering she had braved the storm to come to my house for help, it was clear she was telling the truth.
"I've called you repeatedly, but you didn't return any calls. Where have you been while Grace is in this state?"
When I pressed him, Bobby sighed as if annoyed and pulled out a notebook and a business card holder from his bag. The notebook was filled with times and places, detailing exactly where he had been on the night Emily came to my house. That night, Bobby had been out dining with fellow influencers. For several days, he had been attending networking events and gatherings with influencers who had more followers and fame than him. Additionally, it came to light that Bobby had been hiding many things. He had bought expensive equipment for filming his social media content and high-end accessories and clothes to avoid being overshadowed by other influencers at networking events. Receipts for these purchases were found. Realizing he couldn't hide it any longer, Bobby began to confess everything he had been hiding, including the circumstances that led to Grace's collapse. He revealed that the costs of buying accessories and equipment had spiraled out of control, and despite earning from sponsored posts, he had secretly taken loans from a finance company, leading to arguments when Grace found out. There had been continuous arguments about social media and debt, and Bobby's attitude towards Grace and Emily had become increasingly harsh. While his social media posts depicted a happy family, the reality was vastly different, creating a significant emotional rift. On the day Grace collapsed and Emily came to seek help, Grace had pleaded with Bobby to quit social media to save their family, but he had lashed out violently and then went to a networking event. It wasn't just that. Dad kicked her when she grabbed his leg while she was down, shouting, "Let go." Emily's further revelations added to the secrets Bobby had already confessed. He instinctively tried to cover Emily's mouth to stop her from saying more, but a male nurse in the room restrained him. The doctor, deeming it dangerous for Bobby to act out, instructed the nurse to call the police, and a few minutes later, Bobby was taken into custody. Following this, with my accompaniment, Emily provided a detailed account of the events to the police, leading to the case being officially treated as a domestic violence incident. Although not reported by the media, Bobby was effectively forced into a hiatus from his activities. While he ceased his social media updates to contain the situation, I felt it was necessary to expose the truth to the public. I bought a phone for Emily and suggested she reveal Bobby's true nature herself. Initially, I considered going to the media, but I feared it would infringe on Grace and Emily's privacy. Instead, I sent a disclosure letter to the companies that had sponsored Bobby. The effect was immediate. Bobby received numerous inquiries from sponsors, and once they confirmed Emily's revelations were true, their trust in him plummeted. Already under mental strain from police questioning, Bobby was devastated when companies started demanding compensation for breach of contract. His social network and connections crumbled, and Bobby cursed his actions. Emily and I visited the hospital every day, desperately trying to bring Grace back from the brink of death. We believed that if we kept talking to her, she would eventually wake up. We prepared changes of clothes and kept talking to Grace, believing she would wake up someday. One day, after finishing all the household chores in the morning, Emily and I headed to the hospital, as her school was also on break. We had become familiar faces to the receptionists. As we rode the elevator to Grace's hospital room, we heard voices from inside. Curious, we entered to find Grace awake, cheerfully talking to a nurse. Seeing Grace awake, Emily forgot she was in a hospital and ran to her, crying tears of joy as she hugged her recovering mother.
"Mom, I'm so glad. I'm so glad."
"Mom, Emily, I'm sorry for worrying you, but I'm okay now. I heard Emily helped me. Emily is my hero, thank you."
I was so worried, Grace.
"Mom, thank you so much for taking care of Emily too." Emily and I hugged Grace tightly, vowing never to let something like this happen again, and explained everything that had occurred while she was unconscious. But there was no need to say much. Grace had already made up her mind. Bobby needed to understand that everything he did would come back to him. Grace filed for divorce and demanded substantial alimony as a victim of domestic violence. In exchange for never seeing Emily again, she demanded a significant increase in child support, further inflating Bobby's debt, which had already soared due to the breach of contract fines. Having inflicted violence and publicly lied about his family, Bobby had brought this upon himself. Grace threw the divorce papers at Bobby as he was being taken into police custody, ending their marriage. Later, the divorce papers, properly filled out and signed by Bobby, were sent back to Grace, officially ending their marriage and making them strangers. Since Bobby had rented the apartment under his name, Grace and Emily moved in with me once Grace had recovered. Fortunately, I had plenty of room to spare. Grace took one of the 2 available rooms as her own, and Emily moved into the room Grace used when she was a child. They often talked about Grace's childhood, bringing laughter and joy. As for Bobby, he paid his bail but lost all credibility. Having built his career as a family-oriented influencer, he couldn't continue his work after the divorce and was left despondent. He tried to get a job in corporate PR using his influencer skills, but his bad reputation had already spread, and he was turned down at every interview. Once living a luxurious influencer life, Bobby now faced poverty and even came to my house, seeking help. However, we decided we had no obligation to help him and called the police when he wouldn't leave. As the police took him away again, his figure seemed much smaller than the man who once flaunted his wealth and status. We might not live as luxuriously as before, but the 3 of us vowed to support each other and live even happier lives together.